There are no places for non-families, so I found myself standing in a restaurant where everyone was gathering to celebrate my grandson Eric's milestone. The atmosphere was intense, filled with expectation and cheerful conversations, but suddenly I realized that there was no place for me in the designated hall. My eyes darted over the faces of the relatives who had also arrived, but their warmth and joy could not overshadow what awaited me. At that moment, Sophia, the wife of my eldest son Jacob, threw me a shocking statement. I felt anger flare up inside me, but fortunately, my brother Patrick, who was standing next to me, clapped me on the shoulder, calming me down. His support was like a balm to my soul, and despite the emotional storm, I gathered my thoughts. "Then maybe we should go home," I said, and to my surprise, everyone immediately replied, "Yes." We turned around on the spot, despite the screams and the noise of breaking dishes behind us. I ignored it, staring at the departing crowd, and, feeling safe, headed home. My home became my refuge, a place where I could start all over again, despite the fact that there were so many unfulfilled expectations and unclear emotions that accumulated inside. My name is Ruby. I am 51 years old. For 2 years now, I have been working in the office of a company that manages several restaurants, although I am officially listed as a consultant. Working from home, I found a way to cope with the world, which became difficult for me after I suddenly lost my husband Jack 3 years ago. Since then, my life has been like an empty shell, where only the echo of old memories filled the space. I lived alone in a small apartment that Patrick had arranged for me. 4 years ago, I gave the apartment where Jack and I lived to my married son and his wife. Some people ask if I'm lonely, but I found solace in the freedom of loneliness, especially considering the terrible relationship with Sophia. She is 10 years younger than Jacob, and her youth, beauty, and style created tension in our interaction. I knew there was too much on her shoulders, but that didn't make it any easier for the animosity that flared up between us. Sophia, being a model, was the star of her time, and her dreams of a career and a life of luxury turned into a ghost every day. At first, everything seemed perfect: the wedding, the expectation of a child. But when she started having problems with morning sickness, her condition became unbearable. "I don't want to be seen in public like this," she screamed, sinking into the abyss of fear for her appearance. I could feel her discontent flowing into my house like an incessant stream of toxic emotions. The eldest son, Jacob, sought help from Jack and me, pleading, "I need your support. We are not coping." We agreed to move into a large condominium that we bought, but living under the same roof proved to be a challenge. Sophia treated me like a servant, demanding a quick reaction to her whims. "Make me a smoothie, bring it to bed." Her screams filled the air, and I felt helpless, trapped. Every day was a challenge. She demanded that I wash her clothes with a special conditioner, without a smell that might remind me of the old witches. Every conflict left scars, and I began to realize that my home, once cozy, had become an arena for contradictions and resentments. Having seen enough, Jack would have harshly scolded Sophia for her behavior in our house, where it would be reasonable to show understanding to a pregnant woman, but she only snapped back, ignoring his concern. Even when Jack suggested that Jacob talk to her, he only said sadly that it was impossible. Sophia was unable to perceive any words other than her own. "I wish you'd just put up with it," he added, and it seemed like his words were just another drop in the ocean of our patience. Mom, laughing, commented on how infuriating it was, because the very fact of Sophia's pregnancy gave her a certain immunity, forcing us to tolerate her antics. If Jack had been his usual self, perhaps he would have taken a firmer stand, but looking back, I realized that his body was already slowly being destroyed by the disease when Sophia filled the office and living room with cosmetic appliances, leaving Jack less and less space to relax. Even our large bathtub, which we ordered specifically to help him relax after a hard day, became unavailable. He could never just enjoy the hot water while Sophia kept wandering around, claiming that I should just use the shower. I could feel the tension building up as I watched Jack lose ground, arguing with these two. His every word was getting quieter, and I realized that he would have been better off just putting up with it than fighting their oppressive behavior. Seeing Sophia and Jacob ignore my struggle with pain, I felt anger rise in my heart as soon as I heard her spiteful words about not ending up as that shameful old witch. When the cosmetologist came, she was just perplexed by their behavior. Sophia pointed at me with disdain, demanding a younger assistant, but I knew how difficult it was to find someone reliable. I continued my housework in silence, gritting my teeth against the pain in my leg and in my heart. These days were approaching Sophia's due date, and when she gave birth to a healthy baby boy, holding her first grandson Eric in her arms, everything seemed like it was a moment of redemption. Jack shed tears when a tiny hand squeezed his finger tightly, and looking at it, I almost cried. The innocent smile of the child awakened in me the desire to wash away all resentments and negative feelings. But this bright moment turned out to be short-lived. Soon I received the news that Jack had passed out at work. In a panic, I rushed to the hospital, trying to contact Jacob, but his phone remained unread. Without an answer, I reluctantly asked the company to contact him, but it also turned out to be in vain. I hoped that at least Jack would be able to see Eric, and I called Sophia, asking her to take the baby to the hospital. But laughing, she refused, ignoring my request. "Do you really think I'd entrust a child to an old witch with a cane?" she said and hung up the phone. I did not give up, continuing to call, but in the midst of this panic, the lights in the operating room went out, and soon the doctor came out, informing me that Jack had passed away. My memories of that time are a complete void, just a hazy scene, as if it was all filmed through frosted glass. After the funeral, which took place in this haze, I got the flu, and Sophia, scared, reminded me that Eric could get infected, which would be terrible. Every time I looked at the baby, knowing that Jack would not be able to see him, my heart broke, and I realized that my life would never be the same again. She exclaimed sharply and told me to leave the house immediately. It was on the verge, considering that I was already emotionally affected by Jack's sudden death and physically weakened by fever and cough. I felt like I had no strength left in my body to argue with the hysterical Sophia, who barely had time to get dressed. As if under the weight of her words, I left the room, but at that moment, as if in slow motion, I collapsed at the entrance to the elevator hall. Fortunately, the concierge noticed that something was wrong with me and called an ambulance. The doctors examined me and informed me that I was on the verge of pneumonia. Later, my brother Patrick, his wife Helen and nephew came to find out about my condition. Not only were they worried, but they took care of everything, assuring me that there was no need to stay in the hospital. "She's safe," they said, "but it would be terrible if the child caught something." Jacob and Sophia didn't even bother to visit us. Outraged by their attitude, my nephew and Helen suggested that I stay with them for a while, instead of returning to the apartment, where I would once again become a target for Sophia. Going back there would mean resuming my existence as a servant before I even regained my strength. However, it was impossible to live in Patrick's house, where Helen's parents were also staying, due to concerns about infection. My nephew's offer was a welcome salvation for me, and I accepted his kind offer and decided that I would stay with them for a while. I planned to go back to the apartment to pick up the photos of Jack and his personal belongings that were left there. Helen, worried about the situation, decided to come with me. When we visited the condo for the first time in a month, I was shocked. What we found looked like desolation. Dirty glasses and dishes were piled up, and the garbage chute was clogged. The living room turned into a dump where food containers were lying everywhere. The bathrooms were in terrible condition, and I couldn't help but wonder how they could have raised a child in such filth. Sophia was obviously already drunk, even though it was only 3 o'clock in the afternoon. When she returned with a couple of friends, she noticed us and looked surprised for a moment, but then, quickly tilting her face into a grin, she said, "So you're finally back, then start cleaning this room right now." At that moment, Helen, breaking away from her thoughts, approached Sophia with genuine anger. "How dare you talk to Jacob's mom like that after all she's done for you?" she blurted out, not holding back. "You kicked her out as soon as she got the flu." But Sophia and her friends just laughed like a flock of unreasonable birds, huddling together. They added as if they had a great idea, "Why don't you just leave for good? Jacob will inherit this place anyway. You could go back to your parents' house." These words only made Helen's rage worse, but somehow I remained calm despite their outrageous behavior. I knew it was only a matter of time before Sophia and the others tried to kick me out. There was no reason to stay longer with such unpleasant people, so I called Noah and asked for help. We managed to take out all my personal belongings with sentimental value. That day, when I looked back at the apartment for the last time, memories surfaced in my heart. I decided that I would not die in this house. Jack's smiling face when we made the decision to buy this place touched my heart again. I was sure that he would understand this decision, and at that moment I felt that his support was still with me, despite all the disappointments and bitterness. I was sure that after that I moved into a condominium next to my parents' house, which Patrick had arranged for me. This step was a new beginning, allowing me to return to a life that had stopped for a while because of Jack's death. I resumed my work, which had been suspended before he left, and, most importantly, I finally got a rescue cat. This was the long-awaited companion that I couldn't have before because of Jack's allergies. Gradually, I got used to my new life, although every time I met Jacob in the office, there was tension in the air. We worked for the same company, but communication between us was almost minimal. It was as if an invisible barrier separated us, and the polite smiles we exchanged could not hide the depth of our distance. One day I received an unexpected message from Jacob. His contact aroused my curiosity and excitement. In the message, he suggested celebrating an important event for Eric at a restaurant next weekend. Sophia seems to have invited a large number of guests, including relatives and friends of her parents, and Jacob expressed his concern that the balance would be upset if someone from our family did not come. I remembered how Jack looked at his grandson with pride, and this feeling was very contradictory. I realized that despite my anger at Jacob and Sophia, Eric himself was not to blame for the situation. After a little hesitation, I decided to attend the celebration. I sent Jacob a message that I was coming. On the day of the holiday, Patrick, his wife, and other relatives and I gathered in front of the restaurant. Helen, my sister-in-law, quietly remarked that I was not here because of Sophia, but for Eric, and this calmed me down a little. We were shown into the largest room of the restaurant, where there were low tables and chairs. With my mobility problems, such an installation would be difficult for me, and I asked the staff for a higher chair. But Sophia interrupted me, loudly stating that there was no extra seat, so just stand up. Suddenly, clenching my fists in anger, I turned to my relatives. "Will we go back home?" I asked, and they answered without hesitation, yes. There was silence in the hall, and although the guests from Sophia's side were worried, Sophia's parents came forward apologizing to us. They hurriedly began to scold Sophia, but this did not stop her. Suddenly, Sophia burst into anger, her face contorted with rage. She started throwing everything that came to hand: vases, framed paintings, dishes. Screams, noise, and the sound of breaking glass filled the room, but we ignored it and left the restaurant, leaving chaos in our wake. Outside, in the fresh air, I took a deep breath. Patrick and I decided to hold a strategic meeting to prepare for what was to come. The company we worked for was a family business built by my grandfather. Our relatives owned more than half of all shares, and this created its own dynamics in the company. Patrick, who held the position of CEO, has always been a loyal friend of Jack. Jack joined the company at Patrick's request after graduating from college, when his life was just beginning. He married a woman who worked there as a clerk, and they had a son, Jacob. But then, after a long illness, his wife passed away, leaving Jack with bitterness and loneliness. All this context imposed additional difficulties on the relationship in the company, and I knew that we would have to face the consequences of what happened. When Jacob was in the 8th grade, Patrick noticed how Jack, combining work and family life, became a pillar of support for everyone. This prompted him to propose marriage to me, probably out of concern for my future, related to disability and lack of social connections. Initially, I hesitated, but Jack's words sunk into my soul. I am a single father with a child, but I intend to take care of you. You will become a part of our family. Jacob, who has now become my stepson, showed neither hostility nor special warmth towards me. I understood that it was unwise to expect more from him after losing my mother, so I tried my best to become a good stepmother. When Jacob graduated from college and expressed a desire to work for the same company as his father, it moved me to tears. At that moment, it seemed that everything was going for the best, but this peaceful period ended when Jacob had a wedding with Sophia. From the very beginning of my life with Sophia, I couldn't ignore her domineering behavior. At some point, I decided that Jacob should have a serious conversation with his wife about what was going on. I was waiting for him in the company's underground parking lot, ready to discuss this difficult situation. But to my surprise, instead of seeing him alone, I witnessed a scene that shocked me. Jacob was hugging a married colleague. Their closeness was so obvious that, hiding behind a pillar, I felt the ground give way under my feet. The shock was unbearable, and I could hardly believe my ears when Jacob, hugging a woman, said, "If anyone sees us here, we will both be fired." She confidently replied that she would not make such a mistake, and if her case was discovered, the company would not be fired, because she was the step-niece of the president. I stood in a daze when Jacob continued that his real mom was just a country girl, and I, although a stepmother, was the executive vice president of the company and the granddaughter of the founder, which gave me a significant stake in the assets. When they left, I returned home, hardly realizing the severity of what was happening. His words kept turning over and over in my head, and gradually I realized why Sophia had always been dismissive of me, and why Jacob hadn't reprimanded her. It was like peeling layers off an onion to reveal a truth that had been hidden for a long time. Sophia probably knew about this from the very beginning of their marriage, because I was just a stepmother, and they believed that I was just a tool that could be handled at will until they inherited the estate. However, there was another truth that neither Sophia nor Jacob understood. Jacob was not legally adopted, he was only Jack's stepson, who had no inheritance rights. Patrick, as CEO, also could not transfer any assets to Jacob, since he was just a step-nephew. After realizing this, I realized that I had to take steps to protect my rights. After overcoming the shock, I immediately consulted with Patrick and his wife Helen. Following their advice, I took measures at the mayor's office to ensure that no unauthorized adoption would occur. I also arranged with a lawyer to entrust the management of my personal assets. This process was almost complete when Jack passed away. His property was mainly spent on the treatment of his first wife and consisted only of savings and life insurance. I quickly gave up the inheritance, and the reason for this was that the condominium in which I lived was never discussed during the inheritance process. It was scary, how greed can blind people. Jacob and Sophia were probably in a hurry to kick me out after I gave up my inheritance, thinking that this apartment belonged to Jack. I knew I had to be prepared for any consequences, no matter what they were up to. I didn't want to ruin his life abruptly, but this time I reached my limit. My patience ran out, and I was determined to file for eviction because of the illegal occupation of the condominium. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was time to end this mess. The moment I started the process with the lawyer, Sophia's parents decided to step in to apologize. Sophia seemed to be in difficulty and said that we shouldn't come because she needed to establish relations with the family of the man she married. She assured us that the birth of the child would be under the control of Jacob's family, and we, not understanding the depth of the situation, took her word for it. When they were allowed into the living room, they apologized again and again, but it was too late for regrets. There was a noise, and soon Jacob joined us. His face betrayed his confusion as he said, "I had no idea that my wife could be so unreasonable." He was sincere when he said he was sorry for what he had done to his mother, but when he saw Sophia start crying, he suddenly decided, "We're getting divorced. Take the child and leave this apartment." I could barely contain my emotions when I saw him looking at Sophia with such a hard expression. Goosebumps ran down my spine, and I almost growled with rage. Patrick, who was sitting next to him, reacted with a cold look. "Do you understand that this incident has consequences for our company?" He knew that the uproar caused by this scandal would have serious consequences. "Both of you will pay for the damage," he said, and then decisively kicked everyone out of the waiting room. After that, Patrick began preparing for Jacob's dismissal. He was furious not only that Sophia had caused this disgrace, but also because of Jacob's negligence in allowing her to walk around without control. They even destroyed the store's equipment, mutilating the decor, and firing Jacob seemed like a necessary step. Despite his initial steadfastness about being fired immediately, other executives coaxed him, explaining that anger could put the company at a disadvantage in the event of a lawsuit. Our law firm, known for its capable lawyers, did a great job, providing enough evidence to fire Jacob in 2 weeks. He was soon summoned to court, and he seemed ready for his dismissal. However, when he arrived, he was amazed by the huge number of people present, and he looked stunned. Patrick, who was sitting in the center of the council, began his speech. "We have gathered today to inform you of the decision on your dismissal." Jacob clenched his fists, his face growing increasingly grim as he heard Patrick pronounce his name with a formal tone. Jacob's lawyer immediately objected. "My client admits that there were problems with his stepmother Ruby, but to associate this with his dismissal is unlawful." Jacob, upon hearing this, looked confident, even pleased, and said, "There is no excuse for my ex-wife's rudeness at the celebration. But it was a personal matter. Isn't it wrong to fire me because of this?" He defiantly placed the dictaphone on the table, causing excitement among those present. "I am also ready to report this as harassment in the media, if necessary." This phrase hung in the air, and Patrick, along with the other leaders, fell into silence. Jacob, feeling his victory, continued, "You are aware of the public reaction to companies that violate the rights of their employees. Are you sure you want to fire me knowing what's going to happen?" At that moment, Jacob's lawyer, instead of the expected concern, looked rather smug, as if he knew that they had trumps in their hands. There was tension in the room, and I realized that everything was just beginning. But Jacob, confident in his rightness, did not notice Patrick's gloomy look and asked in a deeper voice than usual, "Oh, so you want to continue working with us? This is a difficult step. However, if you want me to leave the company peacefully, give me a certain amount of money as a reward." There was a threat in his words, and he leaned forward on the table with a smirk, as if challenging the surrounding leaders. The next moment, laughter rang out, spontaneous and loud, and some laughed so hard that tears formed in the corners of their eyes. Jacob, stunned by this reaction, quickly blushed and began to scold the fly, and his lawyer seemed to be desperately trying to calm him down. "The notice of dismissal indicates the reasons," Patrick said, his voice calm but with a slight hardness. "I'll explain them now, and if you have any objections, we can discuss them later." His words overwhelmed Jacob, who, along with the lawyer, sat down in silence, waiting for further clarification. At that moment, a group in dark suits came forward, bowed slightly, and turned on the electronic board in the center of the meeting room. Screenshots of the pages immediately appeared on the screen, which sold wine imported exclusively for the restaurants participating in the group. There was an enlarged photo of the wine seller's icon next to the screen, and the moment it was displayed, Jacob stood up, his face pale. "It's not me," he exclaimed in despair, realizing that the cropped selfie used for the badge was displayed on the screen. The original photos were neatly displayed on the screen, along with a written image match ratio of 101%. Jacob looked more and more confused, and his lawyer, still not understanding the seriousness of the situation, looked at him in confusion. A man from the group in dark suits came forward and introduced himself as an employee of a law firm hired by the company. Let me explain the reasons for the notice of dismissal. They include embezzlement, harassment, unjustified workplace pressure, use of one's leadership position, leakage of confidential company information, unauthorized absence, tardiness, idleness, and damage to the reputation of the company, he said, explaining everything with clarity and precision that made Jacob sweat. The company's legal and accounting departments secretly investigated rumors that wine should be sold exclusively in online stores. In the process, they identified the original account and, in cooperation with the police, discovered that this account was linked to Jacob's online account. He continued, while Jacob, losing the remnants of calm, blushed again. In addition, the inventory management department discovered the existence of double books during the interrogation. Several employees admitted that they were forced to participate in Jacob's illegal activities, which implied that they would be fired if they did not comply. With every word the man uttered, the tension in the room grew, and Jacob seemed to lose control of himself. The following images that appeared on the screen were a real blow. A video, apparently secretly filmed on a mobile phone, captured Jacob subjecting female interns and temporary staff to sexual harassment. Jacob's lawyer couldn't take his eyes off the repetitive video. His mouth remained open in shock. Then images of customer information intended for sale by our company to a competitor and a USB stick with original recipes were shown. When Jacob saw the envelope with the name of the legal advisor of the competitor company, his face changed, his color turned ashen, and his hands began to tremble on the table. Our lawyer did not hesitate to explain. The USB was transferred from a competitor company, and suspicions about the source of this confidential information arose even before its use. At that moment, tension hung in the air, and I knew that the storm was only growing. When rechecking the receipt method, it turned out that an employee of a competitor company received data from Mr. Jacob Miller in exchange for a significant amount of money. As he explained, the competitor company quickly dealt with the employee involved and returned the data to us along with documents explaining the actual situation. Jacob's lawyer was stunned by the continuous exposure. Everyone present listened to his words in stunned silence until our lawyer continued. Although it may seem superfluous, it is worth mentioning that now all these illegal actions have already led to the filing of criminal lawsuits. Perhaps, instead of discussing settlement payments, you should prepare for criminal defense. With an icy laugh, Jacob's lawyer blushed. I haven't heard anything about this from my client. I can't represent him under the circumstances, he exclaimed, looking at Jacob before rushing out of the room, leaving him alone. Jacob's initial courage disappeared, and he collapsed into a chair, realizing the gravity of his situation. The women he was stalking in the video lined up in front of him. We will also file a claim for damages, they stated firmly, adding insult to injury. Moreover, it was confirmed in social media posts that you cheated on several women, using the company's resources even during working hours, and committed inappropriate actions in public. Our lawyer spoke pleasantly, but without a smile in his eyes. Jacob finally collapsed from his chair while sitting on the floor, defeated when Patrick and the lawyer claimed that Jacob was promptly fired for misconduct during the investigation that followed his interrogation about embezzlement. He tried to negotiate a settlement to avoid jail time, but found a willing lawyer difficult. Despite his best efforts, he managed to cover his lawyer's fees and compensation payments using his father's inheritance. He avoided jail time for embezzlement, but was unable to prepare for compensation claims for leaking confidential information and alleged emotional damage. Sophia, understandably, was furious that Jacob had quickly abandoned her for his own protection, filing a defiant claim for damages from the Division of Assets and Alimony. Let's do a DNA test to sort out paternity, Jacob demanded, focusing on the investigation rather than financial problems. Sophia, confidently agreeing, was shocked, and the results showed that the child was not Jacob. An investigation of the offspring conducted by a detective hired by Jacob revealed that at the time of their marriage, Sophia had several partners, one of whom turned out to be the biological father of the child. She tried to deny any family ties with Jacob, but by law Eric was still considered Jacob's child, which meant that he could not avoid alimony obligations. Jacob initiated mediation to confirm the absence of a parental relationship, while the public was waiting for a long-term solution. Exposing Sophia's tumultuous private life in court was something her parents wanted to avoid at all costs. This led to an explosive reaction. "Stop embarrassing us with your antics." They demanded to force Sophia to withdraw all claims for damages from the division of assets and alimony. Then, for reasons known only to her, Sophia turned to Zachary with a demand to recognize his paternity. "You have to take responsibility for this child," she insisted, and although Zachary was the biological father of her child, he refused to acknowledge his responsibility. The fear that his wife would find out about this made Zachary offer Sophia alimony, but she was not satisfied. Sophia took the child and, taking advantage of the moment, ran into Zachary when he returned home. "Don't you think it's terrible that our child doesn't get proper alimony? He should know his father," she boldly declared, exposing her feelings. Zachary, caught off guard by this revelation, felt his life falling apart. His wife, seeing this, was furious and quickly divorced him, transferring all the desired property to her name: house, savings, shares. Zachary was left with nothing, and at first Sophia grinned, thinking that she could become Zachary's next wife, but quickly realized that his life had already collapsed. When Zachary lost everything, including his job at his father-in-law's company, he was confused and blamed Sophia for everything. He thought that her actions were the reason for his downfall, and since then he has relentlessly pursued her wherever she hid. Sophia, frightened by his obsession, realized that her parents, in order to avoid a scandal, had taken away only their grants, leaving her alone with problems. When Eric and Dowd kicked Sophia out of the house, she found herself without support and without shelter, and she had nowhere to go. In search of a livelihood, she began working at night to feed herself and her child. Now Zachary, who had become drunk and unemployed, had also become her burden. I found out about it through a detective I hired to investigate it later. Meanwhile, Jacob, having completed all the lawsuits, was left with a mountain of debts. Alimony payments and claims for damages related to the restoration of the condominium seemed to him the last blow. Attempts to return to normal life proved futile, as he could not find a stable job and resorted to short-term part-time jobs that did not bring him success. The time soon came when he couldn't even afford a mobile phone. Calling from a public phone, he begged for help, but the call ended in silence when I didn't answer. He was rumored to have been last seen when he was picked up by barely legal debt collectors, and his whereabouts have remained unknown ever since. As for me, this experience has changed me. Previously, I considered myself only a decorative leader, a burden to my family, not contributing anything to the common cause. However, during this ordeal, my colleagues encouraged me, and I began to realize that the true meaning of work lies in interacting with people and understanding their needs. "Ruby, you can bridge this gap. You have every chance to be confident," one of my colleagues told me. It made me think about how important it is to actively participate in the work and stop looking for excuses. I am now 51 years old, and I have only 9 years left before retirement. Instead of mourning the lost opportunities, I am determined to make the most of this time. My current goal is to earn money to extend my retirement from Patrick and our relatives, and to inform Jack about it, who, unfortunately, passed away.